transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the full destroyer, the completely perfected, fully living being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata and Khor in the world, supreme God of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods as human beings, to you the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, those who dwell from the Shakya clan, I prostrate and make offerings to go for refuge. When, O supreme amongst humans, you were born on this earth, you paced out 7 strides and said, I am supreme in this world, to you who are wise then I prostrate. With pure bodies formed supremely pure, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best, Lord, to you I prostrate. With the supreme signs, face like spotless moon, color like gold, to you I prostrate. Thus free like you, the 3 worlds are not, incomparably wise one, to you I prostrate. The Savior having great compassion, the Founder having all understanding, the field of merit with qualities like a vast ocean, to the one gone to lessons I prostrate. The purity that frees one from attachment, the virtue that frees one from lower realms, the one path to sublime pure reality, to the Dharma that pacifies I prostrate. Those who are liberated and also show the path to liberation, the holy field qualified with the realizations, who are devoted to the moral precepts. To you the sublime community intending virtue I prostrate. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the God Refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all 3 ever devout homage. To all worthy of respect, bowing with bodies as many as all realms, atoms, and all aspects, with supreme faith I pay homage. Do not commit any unvirtuous actions, perform only virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly, the teachings of the Buddha. A star, a visualization, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud. See conditioned things as such. Through the merits, may such beings attain the rank of all seeing, subdue the flow of faults, be delivered from samsara version, perturbed by waves of aging, sickness, and death. I prostrate to the Arya Triple Gem, thus did I hear at one time. The Bhagavan was dwelling on Master Vulture's mountain in Rajagriha, together with the great community of monks and the great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan was absorbed in a concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva Mahasabha Arya Avalokiteshwara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom, and beheld those 5 aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva Mahasabha Arya Avalokiteshwara. How should I be son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva Mahasabha Arya Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Shariputra. Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those 5 aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty, emptiness is form, emptiness is not ultimate form, form is also not ultimate. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra likewise all phenomena are empty, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased statements, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Therefore, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no mouth, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, no phenomena. There is no eye element, and so on, up to including no mind element and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance and extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear, having completely passed beyond error, to reach the end point of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the 3 times also manifest the completely awakened, unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment, and reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequal, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering should be known as truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared, Tayata, Gade, Paragade, Parasanga, Bodhi, Swaha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasabha, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration, and commend the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Avalokiteshwara, saying, well said, son of Buddha, it is like that. It is like that. One should practice the profound perfections, just as you are indicating. Even its title as just. About one happiness spoken of the Shariputra, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Avalokiteshwara, and those surrounding their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, and swords and gunners, were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagavan. So then we can skip to the short mandala offering. No, it's on page 98. On page 98. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, four continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offering. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. O holy, perfect, pure land, from the clouds of compassion that form from the skies of the Dharma kindness. Please release our being from me, as I say in accordance with the deeds supposed to be trained. I go for refuge until enlightenment to the Buddha, the Dharma, and Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create for explaining the Dharma, may I become a Buddha and benefit all sentients. I go for refuge until enlightenment to the Buddha, the Dharma, and Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create for explaining the Dharma, may I become a Buddha and benefit all sentients. I go for refuge until enlightenment to the Buddha, the Dharma, and Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create for explaining the Dharma, may I become a Buddha and benefit all sentients. So briefly visualize all sentient beings surrounding you. Yeah, bring to mind all the sentient beings in the universe with whom we're inextricably related, who are the source of all our happiness in the present, past, and future. Then we can visualize them all seated around us in the three groups of friends, enemies, and strangers. And then try to generate the Bodhi mind, Bodhisattva attitude. Thinking in order to repay the kindness of all the sentient beings, I must do whatever I can to free them from suffering and lead them to perfect happiness. In order to do that, I myself must become fully enlightened. So therefore I'm going to engage in the practice of listening to, contemplating, meditating on the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. Okay, so we're on page, let's see, we're on in the commentary, in this blue booklet, in the pink section, which contains the commentary. It's the second section of the booklet. We're on page number 3. Did you guys have a discussion group?
Yes,
Since the last class? How many times? 1 or 2?
1.
Just 1? Okay. How did it go?
It went well.
Three people came.
Okay. How did it go among the 3 of you?
It was introduction to Buddhism by Shanti.
Alright.
Like,
The class.
because
I
our
gave you a whole lot of
was-
questions.
You did?
Yeah. I sent to Donnie like 7 questions for the discussion group. You didn't get them?
Didn't get them.
No.
I'll just speak to Johnny about that. Yeah, I sent her.
Okay. Maybe next week we do.
Yeah, I sent 7 questions.
Next week.
Sorry. You didn't get that. Did any questions arise from your discussion?
We didn't note down. I think there were quite a few things unanswered.
Okay. Next time when you're having a discussion group, when you have questions yourself arise among you, then you note down and I can try to answer, or whoever is teaching can try to answer. Okay, so last class, basically I just sort of introduced, mainly introduced the 3 turnings of the Wheel of Dharma. And then, well, the basic studies program, and then the 3 turnings of the Wheel of Dharma. And then I think we discussed the meaning of the title of the Heart Sutra.
Legtsok,
Yes?
there was a question from
Yes.
It says, the words of the Buddha could not exist in the Buddha's mind before he spoke them, or in the minds of the audience after he had spoken them. What does that mean?
You're looking in the commentary?
Yeah. Page
Below.
4. Page 4, yeah. Page 4.
Page 4.
part of-
Okay, we'll get there in just a minute. I'm starting to explain from page 3
Okay, good.
at the bottom where it says the general meaning. So yeah, actually there's a lot of, I find his commentary at the beginning, it's kind of strange. I mean, the things he emphasizes and then the things he doesn't speak about, it's kind of, I don't really understand the logic. But, so yeah, I wanted to kind of try to read through a lot of it, sort of go through a lot of it kind of quickly today, and get to the actual main commentary on the sutra sort of more quickly.
My contribution
Uh,
for today.
Yeah, okay, so let's look. At the bottom of page 3, it says the general meaning. The speaker of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra is Shakyamuni Buddha. There are a variety of assertions among the Buddhist philosophical schools concerning the nature of his speech, so the nature of the Buddha's speech. The Vaibhashikas assert, so the Vaibhashika is the lowest of the 4 Buddhist schools. There's a Vaibhashika, Sautrantika, Chittamatra, and Madhyamaka. Anyway, let me just read this first. The Vaibhashikas assert that it is a non-associated compositional factor because it's the composite of words, terms, and letters. So according to the Vaibhashika, then words and terms and letters are non-associated compositional factors. So within the 3 kinds of impermanent phenomena or functioning things, you can divide into 3 different types. There are physical things, and then mental things, and then non-associated compositional factors. So non-associated compositional factors means it's something that's a functioning thing or an impermanent thing, but it's not physical and it's not mental. Basically, that's what that means. So according to the Vaibhashika, words, terms, and letters they're not physical things, they're not mental things, but they're impermanent. So then they fall in this miscellaneous kind of catch-all category called non-associated compositional factors. Yeah, you can divide all phenomena into things that are permanent and things that are impermanent. I discussed that a lot last time. So then of things that are impermanent, impermanent phenomena and functioning things are synonyms. Impermanent phenomena and functioning things. So you can divide functioning things into 3 different types. So there are things, physical things, like the objects of our 5 senses, physical things. And then, of course, our mind and all our mental activity, our feelings and the thoughts and plans and judgments and memories, those are all mental phenomena. Right? So there's physical phenomena, mental phenomena. And then there's all other impermanent phenomena, or all other functioning things that are not included in physical and mental phenomena. So those fall in this catch-all category of non-associated compositional factors. They're not associated because they're not associated with physical, or they're not associated with mental. So here associated means they're not something physical, they're not something mental.
So what could it be?
Like you, Dipti. Yeah. Are you physical?
Yeah, I'm physical.
Are you your body?
No, I'm not a body.
So what physical thing are you?
I exist in a body.
Yeah. So no pervasion. Just because you exist in your body doesn't mean you're a physical thing.
Then is it the mind?
Are you your mind?
Yeah, little. Yes.
So does your mind eat food?
No.
So you don't eat food?
I do eat food. My body
No, you
eats
don't,
food.
because
My
you're your
body
mind.
eats food.
You don't eat food because you're your mind, and your mind doesn't eat food.
The body I exist in eats food.
Yeah, but your body's not you, right? Well, when your body does something, do you do that thing? Do you necessarily do that thing? If your body does something, do you necessarily do that? You know, if your body performs an action,
The body doesn't.
do you necessarily perform that action?
Well, I exist in
Yes,
a
this is
decision
a-
for it, but yes.
Yes or no?
Yes.
So if your body performs an action, you necessarily perform that action.
Correct.
And you are your mind, right? That's where we started.
Yeah.
So then whatever action your body performs, your mind also performs?
Yes.
Yes, you have to say yes.
Yes.
So then your mind eats food? That's the logic. Yeah. So, but your mind eats food because your body eats food. Whatever action your body performs, you perform, and you are your mind. You're a school teacher, don't you use logic at school?
Well, not to this level. So it's not neither. It's both.
What?
You said
Hold
it's neither physical nor mental.
Oh, let's
Actually,
finish with
it's
Dipti
both.
first. We're stuck in a bad place. We'll
Yeah.
help her out.
Yeah.
So you're not your body, but if your body performs an action, you perform that action. Right?
Yes.
So do you still want to say that you are your mind, or you want to give that up?
Well, I will still say I have a mind.
Hold on. Can we see your mind? Can I see your mind with
No.
my eyes? But can I see you?
Yeah, you can see my body.
But can I see you? Do you see other people?
I see their physical bodies.
No. That's not answering the question. The question is, do you see other people?
I do see other people.
Yes, you do. Do you see? But you can't. Can you see their minds?
No, I can't.
But they are their minds.
Sure. Yeah.
So then so when you see them, you have to see their mind, right? Because they are their mind.
So I'm not my mind.
No, you're not your mind. So yeah, I mean, a person is the best example of this. Dipti's question was, what is an example of a non-associated compositional factor? A person is the best example. A person, like you as an individual, every person, meaning not only human being, but animal, hungry ghost, or helping, or whatever. Every person is an example of an impermanent thing, or a functioning thing, a thing that changes moment by moment, and is not something physical, and is not something mental. Because it's a functioning thing that's imputed on the basis of a collection of both physical and mental things. We have a body and a mind. On the basis of that, we impute a person. And there is a person. We exist. We're a person. We're not something physical, and we're not something mental. We have aspects of, we have a body, we have a mind, but we're not our body, we're not our mind, and yet we are a thing that is not a body and a mind, and we are not a permanent thing. We're an impermanent thing. We're a functioning thing. So, yeah, so we are a non-associated compositional factor. Another example is time. Like time is changing all the time. It's a non-associated compositional factor. Impermanence itself.
But time is such a human concept, is it? Time is a label that we've given to something that we notice.
But animals also notice time. I mean, it's not. It's a thing that exists. It's a kind of, yeah. What it is exactly, it's hard to say. Or you can say emotion, movement. Is also, it's not something. It's probably not something physical, not something mental. I mean, maybe movement.
Change?
Heat.
Change?
Yeah, just change. You can say change. Yeah, that's a good example. Anyway, those things. So why are we talking about this? Because Vaibhashikas assert that the speech of a Buddha is a non-associated compositional factor. The composite of words, terms, and letters. The Sautantrika, so that's the next higher level of school. So Sautantrikas assert that the nature of words, terms, and letters is external form. And then he says the Prasangikas, because they agree with the world, assert that the word of the Buddha is sound and matter.
Isn't sound matter? That was a question.
Yeah, all sound is matter. Sound, taste, tactile touch, or objects of tactile sensation. Tactile, I guess you mean tactile objects. Sense, they're all matter.
Who asserts this? A sound?
The Prasangikas, yeah, because they agree with the world, assert that the word of the Buddha is sound and matter. So then the Chitta Mantra, explanation of the Chitta Mantra is the rest of the paragraph. It's very long. But actually, when it says the Tantrikas assert that the nature of words, terms, and letters is external form. Actually, I think they assert it's sound. I mean, but sound is a kind of external form. But it's also sound. The Prasangikas also assert that. So the question is, what is the speech of the Buddha, right? So common sense would be, what is your speech? When you speak, your speech, what is that? Is that a sound or something else? You know? Yeah, it's sound, I think. It's an object that we can hear. Sound, the definition of sound is that which is an object of that which is heard by the ear consciousness. Yeah. That which is heard by the ear consciousness. So our speech is something heard by the ear consciousness. Although there is the doubt because we have internal thinking, right? So like if we're going to compose like a poem or a verse or something, first we compose in our mind, and then we might enunciate, verbalize it, or write it down. So if you say we never verbalize it, we just compose it in our mind and then write it down, we compose that, right? So, and is it speech? Actually, the way we usually use speech, we think like, well, you have to enunciate from the mouth, but it is something, but it is letters. Like the written letters are letters. They're composed in our mind. When we compose it in our mind, we compose it in terms of words, right? We might first have a feeling or experience, but then we put that into words, right? So then you can see why the Vaibhashikas at the beginning, they don't want to say that words, terms, and letters are sound. So they give it, they say it's not associated with combinational factors, probably with that sort of thinking in mind. That before the Buddha verbally expressed the Heart Sutra, he actually composed it in his mind, and then it's just expressing the intent of his thought. But that like you can think of words, and those are words, without having taken the form of sound, right? So that's probably their thinking. Sautrantikas assert, but yeah, that the nature of is words and terms in its external form, right? So if we think words in our mind, that's not external. It's not anything external. It's internal. So the Sautrantika are saying, but words and words, terms, and letters are external form. That when you think words in your mind, that's not words, that's not terms or letters. That's just thinking. They would say. So they want to say words and terms are external form, something outside of the person's continuum. And then the Prasangikas, because they agree with the world, it means they agree with common sense, the way we ordinarily speak about, like when we say speech, what we ordinarily mean, without thinking about it too deeply. Then they assert that the word of the Buddha is sound and is therefore matter. Right? Okay. So now the Chitta Mantra, it's a very complex actually view. This is the mind-only school, Chitta Mantra. So the Chitta Mantras say that if the word of the Buddha and the treaties were real sound, so the word of the Buddha is sutras. Sutra and the word of the Buddha is one meaning basically. So treaty, and here treaties means the commentaries on the sutras, usually by disciples of the Buddha and later authors. So the Chitta Mantras say that if the word of the Buddha and the treaties were real sound, then there would be no word of the Buddha or treatise in the continuum of a person who had emitted them as speech. Right? So they go back. They say, if the word of the Buddha or the commentaries on that was real sound, that would be something external, and it would mean that the Buddha didn't have like the Heart Sutra in his mind. It would mean like the poet, when they compose a poem, that poem doesn't exist in their mind because it's sound and that's something
It's
external.
not from intellect.
Yeah, so they're putting emphasis more back, sort of like the Vibhashika, on the internal process that results in external sound of speech. Right? There would be no word of the Buddha or treatise in the continuum of a person who had emitted them as speech. That is, the words of the Buddha could not exist in the Buddha's mind before he spoke them, or in the minds of his audience after he spoke them. So there's also that. If the words spoken by the Buddha are external sound, then one, they can't exist in the Buddha's continuum before he speaks them. And then also when the audience hears the teaching, like the sutra or the commentary, that sutra also can't exist in their mind. So if you hear like some words spoken, and then you understand it, and then you retain the words in your mind, that's also not possible, because it's like you don't have the sutra in your continuum from hearing it, because it's external sound. That's what they're saying. So consequently, they want to posit they want to give a different description for what is the speech of the Buddha. Right? Consequently, according to the Chittamatrans, all phenomena must be established in terms of the individual's mind. Right? Therefore, a Buddha is the wisdom directly realizing all phenomena, which is constantly in meditative equipoise on the cessation that is the limit of reality. It means that is ultimate reality. That is the most subtle aspect of reality. Through the combination of the fulfillment of the aspirational prayers of the Buddha and the pure actions and ripened continuum of his disciples, however, the complete enjoyment body, or the Sambhogakaya, appears as a teacher to bodhisattvas, and the emanation body appears as a teacher to shravakas and so forth, ordinary people like us, are included and so forth. The appearance of the doctrine spoken by the Buddha with the bodies is asserted to be the word of the Buddha. So the appearance of the doctrine, it means the appearance of the Buddha's teachings. It means the appearance of the Buddha teaching sutras like the Heart Sutra. The appearance of the sutra and the appearance of the Buddha teaching that sutra is asserted to be the word of the Buddha. So when we say the word of the Buddha or the speech of the Buddha, we mean this appearance of a Dharma teaching. Okay, so the source for this is a passage in Haribadra's Abhisamayalamkara Loka, cited in Tsongkhapa's Golden Rosary of Good Explanation. Specifically, Ashvabhava's, so that one I won't even try. Yeah. So he says, so that's a commentary by Ashvabhava on I think the Ornament of Clear Realization by Maya Tripathi. But it says, the appearance of prose and poetry as sound or words in the minds. The appearance of prose and poetry as sound are words in the minds of the listeners that operate in accordance with their desired aims. If that is the case, how do bodhisattvas set forth sutras if sutras are actually in the mind of the listener? The mind of the listener is not what they set forth. Because the mind of the listener arises by the power of that, meaning the bodhisattva's discourse, that discourse is called a sutra. It is like discovering a treatise or a mantra during a dream due to the power of a deity, etc., in which a deity causes one to discover something present in one's own mind. Okay, so yeah, so let me just try to, before we read through it again and explain, just try to capture it. So you have to think like a Chittamatra here. Chittamatra, the very name of the school, means mind only. So according to this school, everything, like when we see, according to this school, there are no external forms. There is no external matter. When we have the perception of an external material world, it's just an illusion, right? It's just, actually when we see, like when we look at the painting here and we see a painting, it seems like there's a painting hanging on an external wall and that's there, and people just come along and everybody sees the same painting, right? But for the Chittamatra, it's actually like each of us is having a dream, but because our karma is similar, we're each having a very similar dream. So we're seeing similar things. But like when I see that painting, what's appearing to me is as a projection of my own mind. Just like when we're dreaming, things appear real. Like we hear sounds, we see sights, we taste things, we touch things, and all that appears as real, and it all appears as things external to our mind when it's not, right? It's all a projection of our mind in our dream. So that's the main example for the Chittamatra, for the way the world exists. They draw strongly on this analogy of a dream. So for them, like even in a waking state, all of our perceptions are very much like a dream, and that everything we perceive is a projection of our mind, and is actually one entity with our mind. So there is no actual external physical reality. So then, if you think in that way, then it makes sense what it's saying here. So then for the Chittamatra, when they think about what is the speech of a Buddha, right? They say, well, if the speech of the Buddha was something external physical sound, first of all, that doesn't exist, because there are no external physical things. Secondly, and the reason there are not, is because that sound, the speech of the Buddha, has to exist first in the continuum of the Buddha, in the mind of the Buddha. And then he speaks and teaches, right? And then when the audience hears, also, they don't hear. What appears is that there's an external physical sound which appears to the ears, and we hear that. But actually, what's happening is through the power of the Buddha's speaking, you could say, then in the mind of the audience, the illusion of hearing arises, right? I mean, actually, they call that hearing, but what sound is for the Chittamatra is just the appearance of
Perception of sound.
what?
The appearance of perception.
Yeah, it's like that, the appearance of the perception of sound. But for them, I mean, usually, because we have to say like that, because usually when we talk about sound, we're thinking about some external physical thing. But for them, there is no external physical thing. So for them, sound is just an appearance to the ear sense consciousness, right? But it's not an appearance of an external thing, it's the appearance of an internal thing. Just like when we hear sounds in a dream, right? It's like that. So for them, the sutra, the Heart Sutra, first exists in the mind of the Buddha, and then also when the disciples have the experience of hearing it, they're experiencing an appearance in their own mind, right? So the sutra actually exists in the mind of the disciple. So with that kind of perspective, then let's just read through again from the second line down on page 4. It says, the Chittamatras say that if the word of the Buddha and the treaties are real sound, meaning external sound, then there would be no word of the Buddha or treaties in the continuum of a person who had emitted them as speech, right? So it's the Buddha who emits them as speech. So if they were external sound, then they wouldn't exist in the mind or the continuum of the Buddha. That is, the words of the Buddha could not exist in the Buddha's mind before he spoke them, or in the minds of his audience after he had spoken them. Right? So, yeah. Consequently, according to the Chittamatras, all phenomena must be established in terms of the individual's mind. Just like a dream must be established a dream must be described or spoken of in terms of an individual's mind. Therefore, a Buddha, okay, so now he digresses a little bit. Therefore, okay, so now from when he says therefore, he's going to he's kind of creating a picture of like, when we seem to see like an external person speaking, the Buddha appearing, like Shakyamuni Buddha appearing or Bodhisattva appearing, and then we see it appears like they speak and words come forth from their mouth, and then we hear them with their ear consciousness. So they're kind of giving a different way of describing what actually happens, right? So they say, therefore, a Buddha is the wisdom directly realizing all phenomena, which is constantly in meditative equipoise on the cessation that is the limit of reality. So first they're describing a Buddha's mind. What is a Buddha's mind like? Because, I mean, the most essential thing about a Buddha, just like the most essential thing about any other person, is their mind, what's happening in their mind. So a Buddha is the wisdom directly realizing all phenomena. So, because according to this school, a Buddha is omniscient. So their mind is like wisdom that realizes all phenomena and is constantly in meditative equipoise, so it's in a profoundly deep state of meditative concentration on the cessation that is the limit of reality. So that term, that phrase, the cessation that is the limit of reality, means basically the most subtle nature of reality, or the ultimate nature of reality. So, which in short is that everything is empty of, well, according to the Chittamatra view, it's that everything is empty of
externality.
yeah, you could say, I mean, the easy way to say is empty of external existence, like I was saying. Everything's empty of external existence.
So it's very subjective.
Yeah, everything is subjective. It's like radical subjectivism, basically. Yeah. Okay. So, but in short, just think ultimate. You can think ultimate truth. You don't have to understand exactly what it is. So that's the Buddha's mind, right? In short, the Buddha's mind, on the one hand, it has two aspects. It knows everything. I mean, you can say on the wisdom side, it has two aspects. It knows all phenomena, and it's continually directly perceiving the ultimate nature of phenomena. So think about it. So the reason he's describing the Buddha's mind first is because he's going to go on to say in the next couple of sentences that the appearance of the Buddha teaching is like an illusion created by the enlightened mind of the Buddha, in short, right? So this enlightened mind, it can appear, according to its will, it can appear in different forms, right? In different physical forms, which of course are not external physical forms. They're appearances of physicality in the mind of the person to whom they appear, right? Right. Okay. So therefore, a Buddha is the wisdom directly realizing all phenomena, which is constantly in meditative equipoise on the cessation that is the limit of reality. Through the combination of the fulfillment of aspirational prayers of the Buddha and pure actions, and the ripened continua of his disciples, however, the complete enjoyment body, so this is one of the aspects of the Buddha, the complete enjoyment body appears as a teacher to bodhisattvas, and the emanation body, so this is another aspect of the Buddha, the emanation body appears as a teacher to Shravakas and so forth. Shravakas are like lower level, compared to bodhisattvas, they're a lower level of practitioner. And so forth includes ordinary people like us. Right? Yeah, so that's like, I mean, if you take a modern day context, for most Tibetan Buddhists, for example, His Holiness the Dalai Lama is always said to be an emanation of the Buddha of compassion. Right? Yeah, so there's this picture. What are you pointing at? Oh, yeah. Okay, it's forearm chin, or the tanka there. Anyway, so His Holiness the Dalai Lama, he looks like an ordinary human person, right? He has an ordinary human form. So, I mean, according to the more pure view, then actually that ordinary human form is an emanation body, right? It's an emanation, and it's like I guess the force which is emanating that body is the mind, the enlightened mind of the Buddha of compassion. So imagine there's an enlightened being called the Buddha of compassion. Then, in order to, with a wish to help sentient beings, if they don't appear in some form and talk and do things and like, you know, give advice and you know, give hugs and, you know, give smiles and stuff, then they don't really do anything to benefit people, right? It's just a mind, like we can't see a mind. So then the enlightened mind of the Buddha, it appears in this physical aspect. So to a very high level, like kind of being, a bodhisattva, they appear as a sambhogakaya form, which is like what this image on the tanka here is, right in front of you, this tanka. Or the statue there, those are sambhogakaya aspects. They look like a perfect kind of person, adorned with crowns, adorned with jewels and looking like very young and youthful and having many arms, often many arms and many faces and stuff. That's a sambhogakaya aspect. Whereas like an ordinary human form, like the Dalai Lama's form, is an emanation body. It's a more ordinary kind of aspect. So that's what it's talking about here. Through the combination, so why do those appearances arise? Through the combination of the fulfillment of the aspirational prayers of the Buddha, so by having made prayers, and their pure actions. and due to the ripened continuum of the disciples. It means basically due to the karma, the force of the karma of the disciples. However, the complete enjoyment body appears as a teacher to bodhisattvas, and the emanation body, or nirmanakaya, appears as a teacher to shravakas and so forth. The appearance, so similarly, the appearance of the doctrine, or the sutras, spoken by those Buddha bodies, or by those Buddhas, is asserted to be the word of the Buddha, right? So it's just an appearance. And then it's go on to say how it's just an appearance in the mind of the Buddha or the mind of the disciples. The source for this passage is Haribhadras Abhisamayalam Kara Loka, cited in Tsongkhapa's Golden Rosary, a good explanation, specifically Ashprabhava's that text. The appearance of prose and poetry as sound are words in the minds of the listeners. Right? So again, words exist in the mind of the listeners that operate in accordance with their desired aims. If that is the case, how do bodhisattvas set forth? So if the sutras or the commentaries are just minds are words in the mind of the listener, then how can it be said that the Buddha teaches or the bodhisattvas teach? Right? That question arises. So then he answers, the mind of the listener, so how do the bodhisattvas set forth sutras if sutras are actually in the mind of the listener? Then he says, the mind of the listener is not what the bodhisattvas set forth. Because the mind of the listener arises by the power of the bodhisattva's discourse, that discourse is called a sutra. So it's by the force of the bodhisattva teaching. Then in the mind of the audience, the appearance of hearing the teaching arises, but it exists in their mind. It is like, so then he gives an example. It is like, again, the dream example, right? It is like discovering a treatise or a mantra during a dream due to the power of the deity. So the idea here is if you meditate strongly and say the mantra of and make strong prayers to a deity, then in your dreams you can receive, that deity can cause you to receive teachings. You can receive like a Dharma teaching while you're dreaming in your dreams. So it's like that. Because obviously when you receive the teaching in your dream, it's not something external you're hearing. It's just something arising, it's an appearance arising in your mind, but not solely through the power of your own mind, also through the power of another being. Right. So that's an interesting question too, you can think about. Is it the case, I mean, in your own experience, do you have dreams that you think, oh, maybe that arose to the force of some other being, not just my own, not just to the force of my own mind? I mean, even, it doesn't have to be a deity. You can find, I mean, if you research, there are many instances of people who are very close, when something traumatic happens to one, something arises in the mind of the other that they know what happened, or they have an intuition about what happened. Like, so people who are identical twins, it's very common. Yeah? If one's in a car accident, the other suddenly feels like something. Or parents and child, or siblings. There are many cases of that. So it's something similar to that. Okay. But in short, this is all a digression from the question, what is the speech of a Buddha? Because the Heart Sutra is the speech of a Buddha. So what does it mean to be the speech of a Buddha? But actually, before we go on to the next thing, I'd just like to mention, usually when we talk about the speech of the Buddha, there's many different qualities described. But I thought just to mention a couple. Yeah, just quickly. So first of all, the definition of the speech of the Buddha. The definition of the speech of the Buddha is yeah. So excellent speech that possesses four qualities. Right? The definition of the speech of the Buddha is excellent speech or excellent holy speech which possesses four qualities. Right? So the four qualities of the Buddha's speech. So this is the important part to remember. The four qualities of the Buddha's speech are there's a quality of the subject matter. You can say the mode of expression, the function, and the need of the speech. So there's the subject that is expressed. mode of expression, how that is expressed, and then the function of the Buddha's speech, what function it performs, and then the need of the Buddha's speech. So those are the four. So I'll explain each of those just briefly. So first of all, the subject of the Buddha's speech is it always has to do with higher states of existence and liberation and enlightenment, right? So in short, whatever the Buddha speaks about, it always has to do with or is related to achieving a higher state of existence. So here, that specifically means like a higher rebirth in the future. Higher rebirth mean as a human being or a deva or so forth, which results, of course, from leading a good life, right? From being a good person, and thereby creating good karma and purifying negative karma, and thereby when we die, instead of taking rebirth as an animal or in hell or something, right? We take rebirth as a human or a deva, in order that we can continue on the spiritual path. But just rebirth in samsara in a pleasant state of existence is not the final goal, of course, right? Because that's endless, and that's still in the nature of suffering. So the Buddha's speech always possesses the quality of expressing not only how to achieve higher states, but also how to achieve liberation or nirvana and enlightenment, because those are final goals, right? Enlightenment is the final goal, but sort of midway goal is nirvana. So the Buddha's speech, one quality is it always expresses things that are related to achieving higher states of liberation and enlightenment. Then the way of expressing that is that the Buddha's speech is never, it's completely free of the faults of errors in the words or errors in the order of the words or internal contradictions.
That's the function?
That's not the function, that's the way of expression.
The mode of expression.
Mode of expression, yeah.
Is that
Mode
the
of
second?
expression.
Is that the second?
That's the second one, yeah, the second one. Mode of expression is
Free of the fault of?
free of the faults of mistaken words or mistaken meanings, you could say. Mistaken words or mistaken meanings. I mean, just tangentially, in a separate sort of listing of the Buddha's speech is always very pleasant to hear. It's never abrasive or unpleasant to hear. But that's different. So then the third quality is the function. The Buddha's speech always functions to eliminate afflictive emotions in the mind of the hearer. And to free the listeners from samsara. Right? It has the function of eliminating afflictive emotions, so anger and attachment and ignorance, and reducing the destructive behaviors that people undertake through the force of those afflictive emotions, and thereby lead beings to liberation and enlightenment. So that's the function of the Buddha's speech. And then the need of the Buddha's speech is to free listeners from samsara.
Because the Buddha's speech, Buddha's like a doctor.
Yeah, I mean this relates, but in terms of hearing, you think of the Buddha like yourself like a patient, suffering like a sickness, the Buddha like a skillful doctor. Yeah. So the need of the Buddha's speech is to pacify suffering and lead sentient beings to the happiness of liberation and enlightenment. So these four things I find whenever we read sutras or read a Dharma discourse or listen to a Dharma teaching, I find it very helpful to think about these things, because so often there are things we don't understand or seem confusing. But if you remember, this is the speech of the Buddha, and I guess the more you become familiar with Buddha's teachings and the more you gain some experience in your practice, the more kind of faith grows. But it's helpful to think, this is the speech of the Buddha, so it was spoken with a pure motivation, only to benefit sentient beings. And it was spoken in a skillful way, and has the function of reducing afflictive emotion. So you just remember that while you're listening, and it's very, pleasing.
Could you repeat the need, please?
Yeah, the need is to free sentient beings from samsara and lead them to liberation and enlightenment. Okay, so let's finish this page. Next, whence due to the perfection of wisdom sutras arise? Okay, whence do the perfection of wisdom sutras? So it means from where do the perfection of wisdom sutras arise, right? It's using kind of old English. Whence do the perfection of wisdom sutras arise? They arise from the mouth of the Buddha, as well as from other persons due to the power of his blessing. So this brings us to another division of Buddhist speech. There's speech, so there's speech which arises from the mouth of the Buddha, like the Jataka tales. The Jataka tales are all tales spoken by the Buddha himself, or like the Mahaparinirvana Sutra. It's spoken by the Buddha himself. But then there's also speech which is speech which is or sutras which are spoken in accordance with the Buddha's instruction. So, for example, you notice in accordance with the Buddha's instruction, but it's also a sutra. So you notice at the beginning of the sutras, every sutra it will say, "Thus did I hear at one time." Thus did I hear at one time. Of course, when the Buddha is teaching the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, the Heart Sutra, he doesn't say, "Thus did I hear at one time," right? Because he's speaking it, right? The "Thus did I hear at one time" is added on the beginning when there were three or four great councils where all of the teachings of the Buddha were recited and codified, and it was determined, well, this is the teaching of the Buddha, and these other things are not. So at that time, they added this bit on the beginning. So it's people, the disciples of the Buddha, later they're reciting from memory, reciting his teachings, and they're saying, "Thus did I hear at one time," and then they add on at the beginning, at this place and at this place, like here at Vulture's Peak, there were this retinue of disciples, this kind of audience of people. And then at that time, maybe someone asked the Buddha a question or something happened, and then the Buddha said this. So when the Buddha said this, when the Buddha's actually speaking, of course, that's speech from his own mouth. But all that preliminary part, that is "Thus did I hear at one time," and that sets the stage, sets the context, that's all, that's speech which was like, what did I say? Instructed, yeah. The Buddha instructed his disciples to add that on the beginning. So it's through the force of the Buddha's own action that those words are added. So that's also considered the word of the Buddha, in a way. That's also, yeah. So that's a different kind of the Buddha's speech. It's the Buddha's speech which arose through his instruction. Right? Because it's not that the disciples just decided to make that up. It's the Buddha said. Later when you recite my sutras, you at the beginning add "Thus did I hear," and then name the place and the audience. Describe the place where it was given and the audience. Right. So that's also kind of Buddhist speech. And then the third kind of Buddhist speech is what it says here. Due to the power of blessing. Right? At the end of the second sentence. It says, "They arise from the mouth of the Buddha, as well as from other persons, due to the power of his blessing." Right? So you notice in the Heart Sutra, who's the main speaker in the Heart Sutra?
Avalokiteshwara.
Yeah, Avalokiteshwara. Also Shariputra is speaking. Right? So actually there are actually only a few words actually from the Buddha's mouth in the sutra at the end where he says, "That's very good, that's very good." Everything else is spoken by somebody else. But at the beginning of the sutra it says, through the blessing of the Buddha, Shariputra asked a question. And then through the blessing of the Buddha, also Avalokiteshvara gave a certain answer. So that's why all that speech of Shariputra and that speech of Avalokiteshvara is all considered the speech of the Buddha, because it's through the blessing of the Buddha. Right? And then the speech that is by the power of the blessing of the Buddha, there's many divisions of that, but I won't go into that. But just to name a few, there's sometimes the Buddha can make inanimate objects emit sound. like can make sounds be emitted from the leaves of trees, like rustling in the breeze. Like it said in the Buddhist Pure Lands, that like the sounds of the birds are teaching of Dharma. The leaves rustling, like the sound of the leaves rustling in the trees, or the sound of bells twinkling. All of that from those are emitted the Dharma teaching, sutras.
Is that from the Pratika Buddha's learn as well?
No, that's different. Also from drums. There's this famous, I think one of the sutras we read in, there's the...
Golden Light.
Yeah, the Golden Light Sutra, yeah, there's the sound of a drum.
Yeah.
So that's also through the blessing of the Buddha. Then from this great drum, then the sound of Dharma teaching can be emitted. And then what are some other ones? I guess also people can hear Dharma teaching just within their own mind. I think parts of the Buddha's body also can emit, it said from like the Ushnisha, Buddha's Ushnisha, then the sound can emit sound, the sound of a teaching. Anyway, there's many different kinds of this sutras through the power of the Buddha's blessing. Okay, so let's go down in the commentary. The next question is, where were the perfection of wisdom sutras taught? Right? On Vulture's Peak. So where's Vulture's Peak?
Rajya.
Yeah, in Bihar. Why is it called Vulture's Peak? It is obvious that there are many ways of explaining this because the following appear in Desisanga Gyatso's Clearing Stains from Lapis Lazuli. So Desisanga Gyatso is like the manager of the great fifth Dalai Lama. Anyway, he was also a great scholar. So he says, to explain this, the name, why is that called Vulture's Peak? He says, 1, the mountain is shaped like a vulture. 2, it is shaped like a pile of vultures. 3, it was given the name because vultures protect the mountain, where many vultures ate corpses. And 4, it is called a pile. So it's called a pile due to the brilliance of the birds who are beings who understand emptiness. So he's saying the birds that fly around there, they're not ordinary beings, they're like beings who understand emptiness. And it's due to the brilliance of those birds, it's called a pile. And then 5, when the subduer was 58 years old, in the fire snake year, he went to that mountain, which was shaped like a vulture's head. A demon who had magically changed himself into a vulture took the teacher's robe and dropped it on the mountain, where it turned to stone in 4 layers and is known as the Great Vulture Pile. Because that mountain is the place where the Buddhas teach the perfection of wisdom, it, I think, is like of the Vajra seat in Bodh Gaya and cannot be destroyed by hardness or fire and is immovable. Therefore, it is explained that although other mountains do not impede beings of the intermediate state, this one does. So just to explain that last line, he's saying, beings of the intermediate state is the period between when a person dies and they take rebirth. So after a person, like say a human being dies and they're going to take rebirth as a human. To take rebirth as a human, they have to be conceived in their mother's womb, right? The mother of their future life. So say like we die here in India and we have the karma to take rebirth in Russia or something. So our continuum of consciousness has to go to the place of rebirth, has to go to Russia, or for instance. So it's said that the body, there's a very subtle body possessed by that intermediate state being, and it's said that nothing physical can obstruct that body. So it can go directly through, like, the earth. So, for example, if we were going to take Russia, we wouldn't have to go around the globe. We could just go straight through the earth to just in the snap of fingers and be there at the time of conception for a future life. But it said that so nothing physical can obstruct impede the beings of the intermediate state, or the Bardo, except Bodh Gaya, the Vajradasana and Bodh Gaya, the Vajra seat, and he says the Vulture Peak Mountain, where the Heart Sutra was taught. If that's the case or not, I don't know. Maybe it might be just a way of like praising that mountain, or putting it up on a pedestal. But anyway, it's not very important. So let's go to page 5. Then the next question, when were the perfection of wisdom sutras taught? So there's a lot of debate about this. Again, it's not that important. Let's just read through it. When were the perfection of wisdom sutras taught? The scholars of astrology, known as the 3 oceans, Tsechung, Chodak, Gyatso, Fupa Lutrup Gyatso and Kirtan Norsen Gyatso asserted that he, meaning Shakyamuni Buddha, that he taught the perfection of wisdom sutras on the full moon day of the 3rd lunar month and entered parinirvana on the 15th day of the next month. So they're saying he taught the perfection of wisdom sutras just like 1 month before he passed away. So in his 80s. And he's in his 80s. Yeah, parinirvana means that when he passed away.
It says nirvana, so we're wondering if...
Entered nirvana. No, it means parinirvana. That, okay.
But it says that he was in his 58th year.
No, that's the one before. The other scholar, that was Desi Sengi Gyatso. That's what he says. That's his opinion. Yeah, that's going to be mentioned again below. But these scholars say just 1 month before he passed away, entered nirvana. Entered parinirvana is what they mean. Jamyang Shepa Dorje, which is what these days, like most people will agree with his view. Jamyang Shepa Dorje. He refutes the 13th century scholars Chim and translator Chok and others in his analysis of the perfection of wisdom. In his system, he asserts that the teacher set forth the perfection of wisdom sutras the year after he achieved Buddhahood. So that's when he's like 37, right? These days, most people agree with that view, that the Buddha taught the perfection of wisdom sutras 1 year after he achieved enlightenment. That's the common view these days. Some people, however, doubt that. When the teacher achieved enlightenment on the 15th day of the 4th lunar month, a son was born to Amratodana. I'm not sure who that is. It's someone in the Shakya clan. I think it's like an aunt of the Buddha or something. And that was Ananda, his future attendant, right? Ananda. At the time when he set forth the perfection of wisdom sutra, in the 3rd lunar month, 12th month after he achieved Buddhahood, it had been just slightly more than 10 months since Ananda was born. How then could Ananda have been in the audience when the perfection of wisdom was spoken, if he's just 10 months old, right? To that, Jamyang Shepa responds that there is no fault because Ananda was not in the audience when the perfection of wisdom sutras were initially spoken, but he was present when they were spoken later. There are also doubts about this. The prologue of the 8,000 stanzas, that's the short version of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, says, "Thus did I hear at one time, the transcendent victor was staying at Vulture Peak in Rajgriha with a great assembly of monks, 1,250 monks. They were all arhats who had exhausted their contaminants, in control of all minds, and had achieved the excellent perfection, with the exception of one person, and this was Venerable Ananda." Right? So if he's only 10 months old, why would it say that? If this prologue is the prologue from the time when the 8,000 stanza, I don't want to even try. Okay, sutra. Thank you. Was initially spoken, then it contradicts Jamyang Shepa's assertion that Ananda was absent. If it is the prologue from the time when the word of the Buddha was compiled, it contradicts the fact that Ananda was an arhat at that time, right? Because it said the only person present who was not an arhat was Ananda. If this is a prologue from sometime in between, it seems to contradict the Buddha's instruction to Ananda in the Dharma Samgiti to use the words when compiling his word. Monks collect the doctrine, adding, "Thus did I hear at one time." See, that's where the Buddha gave that instruction, to add that to the beginning of the sutras. Some say that Ananda was even present before the teacher demonstrated the way to become enlightened, because it is explained in Bhutans, that's a great Tibetan scholar who compiled all of the current translated word of the Buddha, actually. Right? Oh, does it say? Oh yeah, Children, yeah, that's just his name. The Buddha, oh no, that's the name of the text, Children, Source of Dharma. It is explained in Bhutan's Source of Dharma as well as in the Lalita Vistara. That when the young prince Siddhartha was tested in the martial arts, Ananda shot an arrow the distance of 2 kroshas, approximately 4 miles. How do you do that? Some say that there was an elder and younger Subhuti, there was a younger and elder, Subhuti, Ananda, Adyan, and Sutisya, with one appearing earlier and the other later, so that the Ananda who appeared in the company of the young Bodhisattva, Siddhartha, was someone other than the son of Amritodana. According to, so this debate goes on, according to the clearing stains from lapis lazuli, so this is by Desi Singh Gyatso, who says he taught the sutra when he was 58. According to the clearing stains from lapis lazuli, the superior Subhuti must have just attained the state of an arhat at the time that the perfection of wisdom was spoken, and Subhuti saw the truth for the first time on the day of the Buddha's descent from the heaven of the 33, to which he had ascended to teach the doctrine to his mother. So that happened, I think, like 12 or 15 years after the Buddha was enlightened. Because after the Buddha was enlightened, I think about between 10 and 15 years, he's said to have ascended to this Tashita heaven. Because when the Buddha was, soon after he was delivered, then his mother passed away. I think 1 week after his birth, his mother passed away, and then he was raised by his mother's younger sister. So in memory of the kindness of his mother, then after he became enlightened, it said he went to this Deva realm where she had been taken rebirth after passing away, and he taught her the Dharma. He taught her the path there. So there's 4 major Buddhist holidays in the year. So one of them is called this descent from Toshita heaven. So it marks the day that the Buddha descended from this Toshita heaven. So it's said that when he descended, there was like a staircase made of light appeared, and he descended to Sanchi, I think. Right? That's why Sanchi. I think it's Sanchi, isn't it? Yeah, I think it's Sanchi. That's why it's famous. There's a big stupa there, and it's a famous place because that's where he said to have descended from this Toshita. Okay. So then, we carry on. There's no point going to explain every detail of that debate because it's not really very important anyway. That's why I'm not sure why he spent so much time on this. Anyway, the Vinaya also says that he attained the state of an arhat not long after that. This is Subhuti. Achieved the state of an arhat not long after the Buddha descended from the Chushita heaven. Therefore, having provided many reasons why it is correct that the perfection of wisdom sutras were spoken in the first snake year, when the subduer, the Muni, was 58 years old. It seems like this author agrees with that the Buddha taught the sutras when he was 58 years old. But that's not the common view. But below, on page 402 of the Clearing Stains from Lapis Lazuli, he explains that the Buddha set forth the perfection of wisdom cycle in the Iron Dog year, when he was 51. There must be a reason. So, no, we'll see what the author's conclusion is, like, the scholars can't decide when the Buddha was born, so how would they know when he taught the sutra? So basically he just says, like, you can't really know. That's his conclusion. I'll just read through the rest. There must be a reason why that many scholars disagree. This is what I think. Consider the example of the year of the teacher's birth. In Choe Kappa's system, so he's one scholar, in Choe Kappa's system, it is the Earth Dragon year, 832 BC. In Mahapandita Satya Shri's system, it is the Fire Snake year, 843 BC. In Kalachakra Yungtong's system, it is the Earth Mouse year, 836. In Atisha's system, it is the Wood Ox year, 835. In Bhutam's system, it is the Fire Horse, 854 BC. In Puk's system, it is the Iron Monkey, 876. And according to the system of the Chinese scholars, it is the Wood Tiger year, 1027 BC. Although all are proven with scripture and reasoning, according to common standards, the year of the teacher's birth is beyond the purview of those scholars. I mean, they don't really know. It is the year of his is the year of his teaching the perfection is the year of his teaching of the perfection of wisdom sutras a similar case? Yes. They don't really, nobody really knows. So that's the end of that discussion. When was the sutra taught? These days, most people say 1 year after the Buddha achieved enlightenment, but yeah, it's so long ago and historical record's not so good, so it's difficult to know. Okay. And it's not that important anyway. Okay. So then the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras are renowned in Tibet by names such as the 17 Mothers and Sons. The most important ones, however, are three: the vast, intermediate, and brief. The vast is the 100,000 stanzas, or usually it's called the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra in 100,000 verses. A stanza is the same as a verse, right? So the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, what we're looking at now is the Heart Sutra. It's a very, 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 very condensed, short version. It's the essence, the heart of the matter, right? It's a very short version of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. But actually there's many different versions. There's a version in 100,000 verses, there's a version in 80,000 verses, there's a version in 25,000 verses, there's a version in 20,000 verses, there's a version in 8,000 verses, and then there's the Heart Sutra. Then there's even shorter ones. There's like a one stanza version, and it said even the letter A is a Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. A. There's a one-letter version. The letter A, as in anatma. It's a negating anatma. A. Yeah. So here, but the three most important ones are considered to be there's a long, intermediate, and short. So the long is the 100,000 verse, the intermediate is the 25,000 verse, and the short is the 8,000 verse. Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. So that's what he's saying here.
Three mothers.
Yeah, they're called the three mothers. So that mother, epithet mother, will be discussed below. The vast, intermediate, or the long or vast, intermediate, and brief, or short. The vast is the 100,000 stanzas, the intermediate is the 25,000 stanzas, and the brief is the 8,000 stanzas. These names are given from the standpoint of the number of shlokas. In general, there are 5 texts. Oh yeah, so this is just a big digression. Anyway, maybe it's interesting if you're interested in historical things and the sutras. I'll just read briefly. In general, there are 5 texts renowned in Tibet as the 5 sets of 100,000. The Prajnaparamita Sutra is the 100,000 of the mind. I think he means the Mahaparinirvana Sutra is the 100,000 of speech. The Ratnaketu Sutra is the 100,000 of body. And the Avatamsaka Sutra is the 100,000 of auspicious qualities. That is the main, that Avatamsaka Sutra. Usually how is it translated? I think it's translated as like the Lotus Sutra. That one is, that's the main basis for a Chinese, is it?
The Lotus one is Sadharma Pundarika Sutra, I guess.
So what's do you know how this is translated in English? Avatamsaka Sutra? Okay. Well, anyway, that one's considered very important in the Chinese tradition, as is the Lotus Sutra. They're very emphasized in that tradition.
This is the Lotus Sutra, Lanka.
No, that is not it. Lotus Sutra is another one called Sadharma Pundarika Sutra.
Dharma Pundarika. Okay, and then there's the Lankavatara Sutra, which is said to be spoken in Lanka, in Sri Lanka. It said that the Buddha went to Sri Lanka and taught that sutra there. Is the 100,000 of activities. These are called the 5 sets of 100,000. The reason for designating them as 100,000 is that the vast Prajnaparamita has 100,000 shlokas. Oh yeah, exactly. The flower ornament sutra. Yeah, that's very important in the Pure Land school of Tibetan, of Chinese Buddhism. Pure Land school.
Flower what?
Flower ornament sutra. The Nirvana Sutra has 100,000 testaments made by the Buddha when he was about to pass into parinirvana. The Ratnakuta Sutra has 100,000 different names of the Buddha. The Avatamsaka Sutra has 100,000 aspirational prayers. It might be that the King of Prayers is in that sutra, actually. And the Lankavatara Sutra has ways of taming 100,000 demons. There are also sutras known as the 5 Royal Sutras that are condensations of the meanings of the 5 sutras. The condensation of the meaning of the Mother is the Heart Sutra. Okay, so the condensation of the meaning of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra in 100,000 verses is this one we're studying now, the Heart Sutra. The condensation of the Mahaparinirvana Sutra is the Atajnana Sutra. The condensation of the meaning of the Avatamsaka Sutra is the Brajachari Pranidhana Sutra, I guess. The condensation of the meaning of the Lankavatara Sutra is the Apatidasana Sutra. And I believe that the reason those are called royal sutras is that in the past the religious kings of Tibet recited those 5 sutras in their religious services. The Heart Sutra is the sutra on view, on the view of truth, or reality. The Atajnana Sutra is on deeds. The Vajra Vidarani Sutra is on ablution. The Bhadracharis is on prayers. And the Apatidasana is on the confession of sins. Okay. Any questions on that page?
No.
No. Stuff, yeah, I don't know, it's kind of, he digresses big time. Anyway, the 3, so this is back to the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras on 7. The 3, the vast, intermediate, and the brief Perfection of Wisdom Sutras were spoken simultaneously because all of the requesters are the same, and the sutras are similar in that there is a prophecy about Ganga Devi at the point of explaining the practice of the Pure Land. These sutras are necessarily spoken simultaneously because it is not feasible that the same Buddha would repeatedly prophesize the enlightenment of the same person. This point was made by the omniscient Buddha. So yeah, it's commonly said that there's different length version of the same sutra, right? So the main subjects and topics explained in each version is the same, and the main thing explained is that all phenomena are empty of inherent existence, that everything is merely a dependent arising. But the layout of the layout, there's like stories interwoven in the sutras, and there's different characters that appear and disappear in the sutras, and there's the Bodhisattva path is also taught in those sutras. So kind of the way the main topics are taught and the order in which they're taught is all the same, but they're taught in some in a very elaborate way and some in a very condensed way. So there's the doubt, well, like, how could they all be spoken at one time? So the reason he gives for arguing that they're all spoken at the same time is because in this Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, in all of them, especially the 3, the long, the vast, intermediate, and brief one, there's all a prophecy of the enlightenment of this sister Ganga Devi, of this woman, that she would become enlightened in the future. The Buddha prophesied that in the future, at such and such a time, with such and such a name, at such and such a place, you'll become fully enlightened. So he made that prophecy. So it's saying that a Buddha wouldn't make a prophecy like that of the same person 3 different times. It's like you wouldn't give the Nobel Peace Prize to the same person three different times on 3 different years, right? Kind of like that. So for that reason, then all the sutras were spoken at the same time, because the Buddha wouldn't repeat the same thing 3 different times like that. So then the question comes, well, why would the Buddha teach in the same thing in such an elaborate way, a middling way, and a very short way? The usual explanation is given that because the people in the audience, the disciples, have very different mental faculties, right? For the very intelligent, they don't need a long explanation. Just with a very few words, they can get the meaning, and then that's fine. Whereas for people with very dull faculties, like me, then you need a very long, elaborate explanation, and you need to say the same things again and again and again and again and again until the person finally gets it. Sometimes when we do in the monastery, when we go to, sometimes when we go to people's homes, just recently I did actually. The Tibetans usually, in traditional Buddhist communities like in Ladakh or Nepal or Sikkim or in Tibet, it's customary for individual families, or sometimes for a whole village, a whole community, to every year invite monks to their village or to their home to read, to make prayers and do auspicious things, like to clear away obstacles and accumulate merit. And then at that time, the family or the village will make they offer very good food to the monks, and the monks spend the whole day like doing different prayers and rituals. But one of the main things they do is read these sutras. And one of the main things they do is read the one in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra in 100,000 verses. So I was just doing last Tuesday I did. Tuesday before last, I went to one village and with 40 monks together, we all read the sutra. But when you read the Perfection of
the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra and 100,000 verses, it's very repetitive. But yeah, on an intellectual level, you think, because it'll say, just like in the Heart Sutra, it says there's no eye, no ears, no nose, no tongue. Why doesn't it just say there's no eyes, ears, nose, tongue, But in the Perfection of Wisdom, I mean, in the 100,000 verse, it's even much longer. It's like, there's long phrases attached to, each instance of a long list of things. So it's very repetitive. So again, intellectually, you think, why would anybody write like that or speak like that? But the effect on your mind as you read it and listen to it, it's kind of like a parent telling a child the same thing again and again and again, and it really goes into your mind. You just spend time thinking about this phrase, which is repeated again and again and again. Like, it has a very deep meaning, right? So by repeating it again and again and again in relation to many, many different things, it really helps you to dwell on it really in your mind and gradually sort of assimilate and penetrate the meaning. So it has a very beneficial effect on the mind, actually, in my small experience. Okay. So those are... Okay, so now he's... so that's about the different versions of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. So then there's a huge another question comes up. Because, as I mentioned last week, the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, of course, they're very popular in Northern Buddhism or in the Sanskrit tradition of Buddhism, which is kind of accepted or emphasized in Tibet, Ladakh, Sri Lanka, formerly all the way over to the Pakistan, Afghanistan, in current day China, Korea. In those countries, they all accept the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras as the word of the Buddha. But in countries like Sri Lanka, Thailand, Burma, where the Pali Sutras, or the Pali tradition of Buddhism is emphasized, they don't accept the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras as the word of the Buddha, right? So, and one of the reasons they would give is that because for like 400 or 500 years, say 400 years after the Buddha passed away, those sutras were not known about. They were completely lost. I mean, from the Sanskrit tradition, they would say they were lost. The Pali tradition, they would say they were made up later on. That's why they're not actually. So in the Pali, the Theravada or the Pali tradition, they would say the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, although they're very nice, they show the Bodhisattva path, but they're not actually the word of Buddha. There's something made up by people later, and those people just claimed they were the word of the Buddha. They sort of fabricated it. So then from the side of the Sanskrit tradition, they want to present arguments why it is the word of the Buddha. It's important. I mean, and if you decide to follow, if you're a follower of this kind of tradition, it's important. I mean, the doubt arises in one's own mind. Is this really the word of the Buddha or not? So it's important to know some reasons. I mean, it's important to know arguments on both sides. But so it's important to know the reasons why, in the followers of the Sanskrit tradition, why they say it's the word of the Buddha. The strongest reason, which His Holiness Dalai Lama always most commonly gives, is that because, and it stands out as a real anomaly actually, because in the Pali Sutras, which are accepted, the Pali Sutras are accepted by everybody as the word of the Buddha. It's just the Sanskrit or the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras which are contested, right? So in the Pali Sutras, it's very obvious that Shakyamuni Buddha has achieved the state of full enlightenment, and which is something very far superior, much beyond the state of his closest disciples, the level of realization of his closest disciples, Shariputra and Moggallana and Ananda and later Mahakashyapa. There's obviously a huge difference between them. Like the Buddha can do all these miraculous things. He can appear in one place, instantaneously. He can. He has, when he teaches, it has a much more powerful effect on the audience. He knows exactly how to deal with every situation in a much more skillful way than so it's from reading the sutras of the Pali Canon, it's very obvious that everybody accepts that the Buddha has this far superior state of realization than anybody else, but it's never described like, well, can Shariputra and Moggallana and Mahakashyapa, can they achieve that state as well? And if so, how? Or can an ordinary sentient being? So in the Pali Canon, it's always, the Buddha is always teaching for ordinary beings, how do you achieve the state of an arhat? How do you achieve the state of liberation from samsara? And there are many, many people who achieve that state. But it's never described, how do you achieve the state of a Buddha, right? And is it possible to achieve the state of the Buddha? So there's a big question that remains, like, well, do ordinary people have the ability to the potential to achieve the state of the same state as Shakyamuni Buddha, or not? Or, you know, and if so, how? That question remains. So that question is totally answered in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. That's what the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras are all about. How an ordinary being can become, not only achieve the state of an arhat, but achieve the state of a fully enlightened being, and why that's possible. So that's very clearly explained. Also in the Pali Sutras, the Buddha it's mentioned, or it's described that the Buddha, there's the Buddha's mind, and then the Buddha has a Sambhogakaya form, Nirmanakaya form, has these different forms, but it's never clearly described how someone can achieve, how those actually are produced. And then also, I mean, the main thing taught in the Pali Sutras is the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Noble Path, right? So, but in the Four Noble Truths, there's the truth of suffering and the truth of the origin of suffering. And then the truth of the cessation and the truth of the path. So it's also a logical outflow from those, like, the truth of cessation, what does cessation mean? I mean, cessation, on the one hand, cessation can mean just the abandonment of afflictive emotions, anger and desire and jealousy, and anxiety and ignorance, especially ignorance, and the stains of those, which then allows us to be free from which if we abandon those, then we no longer take rebirth through the force of afflictive emotion and karma, right? So we're no longer in samsara. But then the Buddha obviously has like this much vaster knowledge, this omniscient mind. We can know like vast things that Shariputra and Moggallana and other arhats can't know. It's very obvious from many instances of things that happened during the Buddha's life that the Buddha, his power of knowing is much greater than the others, right? So then, what other things has the Buddha abandoned that enable his mind to be so clear and lucid that the other arhats have not abandoned? So that's also it's not clearly described in the Pali Sutras, as it's described in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. And then another reason that His Holiness also often points out that the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras are the word of the Buddha is because someone like Nagarjuna, who's a very skeptical, very logical person, scholar, that he existed very close to the time the Buddha passed away in relation to us. I mean, now it's like 2,600 years after the Buddha passed away, so a lot of time has passed in between. But Nagarjuna existed just 400 years after the Buddha passed away. And that's so someone who is as discerning and demanding and skeptical and rational as Nagarjuna, who lived close to the time of the Buddha, if he accepted that the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras are the word of the Buddha, then sort of who are we to doubt that, so much later. So those are some of the main arguments. But he doesn't really go through those arguments, but he's just describing, which is kind of a fairy tale-ish sort of description, like how the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, because he's saying the Buddha 1 year or 20 years or whatever after the Buddha achieved enlightenment, he taught the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. And then, I mean, he doesn't say directly, but he's alluding to, they seem to have been lost for like 300 or 400 years, and then reappeared. So he's giving a description of, well, what happened in that intervening period? Why were they lost, and how is it that they reappear. So why don't we just read what he says, and then we'll come back to
One second.
that. Oh
how
yeah,
many,
sure.
How many of these sutras exist? These wisdom sutras?
Mainly there's 17. There's 17 main ones.
17?
17.
Oh.
Perfection of Wisdom Sutras.
Oh.
Yeah, 17.
17.
Yeah.
So in the Pali canon, it's not possible to achieve Buddhahood? Theravadas don't believe that?
What is the last one?
What? No. I think, I mean, in the Pali Canon, I don't think it doesn't say it's not, I mean, it can't say it's not possible to achieve Buddhahood because the teacher of the Pali Canon is the Buddha, right? And he's achieved Buddhahood. But generally, the two tenet systems, which only accept the Pali Canon and don't accept the Sanskrit Canon, are the Vaibhashika and Sautantrika. So according to both those tenet systems, then different sentient beings, so different beings have different potentials, just innately, right? So some people only have the potential to achieve state of an arhat. Some very few people have the potential to achieve Buddhahood. But where does that potential come from is just not clear. It's kind of the way they seem to describe as if it's just something that's from beginningless time. That person, people have just very different potentials, various potentials.
Not to do with karma?
But what about aspiration?
Not to do with karma. What to do with aspiration?
Yeah. So the thing is, Shakyamuni Buddha attained enlightenment and then he taught.
Yeah.
And so he taught up to the time when one could become an arhat, right? So then, okay, so they stopped there for with the Theravadins. What about, because he taught that they accepted, but what about their own aspirations and why didn't they, what about Shariputra and Moggallana and why didn't they aspire for more?
Yeah, I know. It's a big question. Why didn't they seem to? I mean, you have to be.
So it's more
You have to
like
be careful. Though. Well, first of all, you have to be careful saying the Theravadins, because when you say the Theravadins, it refers to all those people.
Exactly, that's how it appears.
But the people in like Sri Lanka, all the practitioners in Sri Lanka, Burma, Thailand, and among those individuals, there could be bodhisattvas. There could be people aspiring for enlightenment. You can't say. You don't know. Even Shariputra and Moggallana, it's like we can't read their mind to know what's really going on with them. But in the what's presented in the sutras, the way it appears, the way their character appears is, it looks like they're not really aspiring to achieve enlightenment. They're aspiring just to achieve. I mean, Shariputra he voluntarily passed away before Shakyamuni Buddha passed away, which is really, I mean, to me it seemed very strange. It's like, why would you do that? Your teacher who helped you, helped so many sentient beings, and you're the main disciple. It would seem obvious that after your teacher passes away, that it's going to be your responsibility to guide the community afterwards. But instead of remaining until the Buddha passed away and then guiding the community afterwards, Shariputra voluntarily passed away before Shakyamuni Buddha. It's strange, very strange. Moggallana was, I mean, he died through the force of his karma. He was beaten to death by sort of, antagonists of Buddhism.
No, but there was some Theravada lady I met who said to me, who are we to think that we can achieve Buddha? That
Yeah,
was the
I
way
mean, maybe some people have that kind of opinion. Yeah.
You said that the perfection of wisdom sutras are the only ones where he teaches that it's possible for ordinary human beings to achieve Buddhahood.
Yes.
And Theravada tradition, they don't believe that this is the word of the Buddha. So then they don't have the teachings to achieve Buddhahood.
No. But, well, I mean, they don't have the teachings to achieve Buddhahood. Yeah, you could probably, I mean, we would say yes, they don't. Yeah. We would say just solely relying on the Pali Canon, you can't achieve Buddhahood. Yeah. But actually, I mean, most in the ancient Nalanda, I guess in the Tibetan tradition, which is an extension of the ancient Nalanda tradition, most practitioners of the Sanskrit canon would say even relying on the perfection of wisdom sutras alone, you can't achieve enlightenment. You have to rely on the Buddhist tantra as well. right? But that's a whole different kind of discussion. But at least in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, it's, I mean, the main thing it's talking about is the Bodhisattva path. Again and again, it's like how, I mean, that's the main question at the beginning of the Heart Sutra is, Shariputra asks Avalokiteshwara, how should a Bodhisattva practice? How should a Bodhisattva practice the perfection of wisdom? Right? But then there's another question that comes up. Well then, if according to the Sanskrit canon, Shariputra, who's the main disciple of the Buddha, and one of the greatest, but besides Shakyamuni Buddha, is one of the greatest teachers in the Pali canon, right? So in the Sanskrit canon, he's kind of the humble disciple asking the humble guy, asking Avalokiteshvara, how do you practice perfection of wisdom sutras? So it's almost like it would seem to show a totally different side of Shariputra, which is not at all present in the Pali canon. So yeah, it's
a debate.
It's a big debate. Yeah, it's a big debate. And,
Might have been a test.
What?
Might have been a test.
Might have been a test. Yeah, I don't know. It's difficult to say like what is actually the case. But let's read what he says here, and then then we'll stop for the evening. Regarding how the vast mother. So the vast mother means the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. Regarding how the vast mother got back to India, the king of the Nagas was ill, and nothing would help him. A girl told his fortune, saying that in the land of humans there was a master named Nagarjuna, who was skilled in the meaning of the two truths, and who, if invited, would cure the king. In accordance with the prophecy, he went to the land of the Nagas. So here it means Nagarjuna went to the land of the Nagas in order to cure the Naga king of the sickness. This is called the retrieval of the 100,000 stanzas. Another version of the story explains that the master, so the master here means Nagarjuna. Another version, we're on page 7. Another version explains that the master went to the land of the Nagas looking for some sandalwood to erect an image of Tara. This is called the retrieval of the vast mother. Right? The above was called the retrieval of. Did I just repeat myself?
The retrieval of 100,000 stanzas.
Oh yeah. The above was called the retrieval of 100,000 stanzas. So that second story is called the retrieval of the vast mother. When the vast mother was taken from the land of the Nagas in that way, 4 chapters from the end were left in the land of the Nagas. The Maitreya Paripracha, the Dharmogata, and the Sadaprarudita, and Parindana. Therefore, some say that because those are not present at the end of the present version of the Vast Mother, it is not complete. Actually, the Vast Mother means the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra in 100,000 verses. So that is not complete. Others say that the present version of the Vast Mother has the full 100,000 shlokas, and the missing chapters are combined in the Avikara Dhammatva chapter at the end. Therefore, it is in fact complete. Others have a way of filling in the sutra from the 25,000 and the 8,000 by taking the Maitreya Paripracha and the Dharmagota to be one chapter on vows, and the Sadaprarudita to be the second chapter, and the Parindana to be the third. Adding those 3 chapters to the end of some version of the Mother in effect makes the 5 chapters. Chuduk of Go says they are also in the Chinese translation. Okay, regarding how the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras were propagated in the slower land of Tibet. Oh, I thought maybe it just comes below. There was one part about they argue over something. Anyway. I think we'll just skip that section. He's just talking regarding how the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras were propagated in the Sun. So he's talking about how did the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, how were they translated from Sanskrit into Tibetan and then brought to Tibet. So there's different generations of translators. But it ends on page 8 in the middle of the page. The last translation is called the translation of Mo. Okay, that's on the end of page 8. The rest of it you can read on your own. Let's see. There are are 3 well-known translations of the 25,000 stanzas. Again, that's not very important. Alright, let's just skip over. Then this discussion of the 7 seals, which is totally not important. And then, so we'll start from next time on page 9. The meaning of the parts. Yeah, that's the part we wanted to get to. So we can start there next time, and then I can say I've had success.
Is it Verochana or Verukana?
Chana.
That is written as
Verochana.
in Sanskrit they write it. Sanskrit in English they write like that. When you write a Sanskrit word in English, the ch and the thing are written like that.
Is it Cha or
Cha.
Cha?
How long does it take to say the 100,000 stanzas?
How long does it take? It's 12 volumes long. Each volume is in the long folios, leaf folios, like this. And they're about this thick each. So, I mean, it all depends how fast you can read.
We did it a few days ago.
Yeah, I'm a very slow reader. But me and my partner together, we read 1 volume. My partner was very fast. He was very fast reading. He's Tibetan. So together we read 1 volume in about 6 hours. 1 volume in 6 hours. So 12 volumes would, yeah, be 60, 72 hours. Yeah. Very long. But that's not really reading at the pace you would actually speak. That's reading like super fast, as fast as you can. So, yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, the 100,000 verse has not been translated yet. Edward Cons, there's a, I don't know, I think British maybe? What?
Cons is German surname.
Cons, yeah, but he might have been American or British. He might have been American. Anyway, there's a scholar, Cons, C-O-N-Z-E, Cons, who made a very nice translation of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra in 8,000 verses. And that you can, it's been out of print for a long time, but on Amazon.com you can find from like a used bookseller or something. I don't know if we have a copy here, I'm not sure. But it's very beautiful. It's very nice. It's something very different to read the actual sutras. And it's very different than the Pali Sutras. I mean, it's always good, I mean, if you want to actually know what the Buddha taught, so often we just read commentaries. But it's very important, and really fills out your sense of who the Buddha was and how he taught, to go back and read the actual words of the Buddha. And then they carry a lot of blessing also. It's very beneficial, for the mind.
Is it understandable, the translation?
Yeah. He makes it. He goes out of his way to make it very poetic and very understandable. So it's worth looking at. Okay, so let's go back to the Golden Prayer Book and read some dedication verses. Maybe we'll read some verses on page 235.
Venerable, also could you spend a few minutes telling us what the requirements for certification of the Heart Sutra subject in basic program are?
I did it last time a lot. Maybe next time?
Okay.
Namjoon can explain next time. Next Sunday. So next Sunday morning, we'll continue this next Sunday morning. Okay. So think of all the merit we created together during this class by generating a positive motivation at the beginning, coming with a positive intention, and then listening, reflecting on the Buddha's teachings. And then rejoice in all the virtuous actions engaged in by all of the sentient beings all over the world, parents and teachers, and nurses and doctors and so forth, friends, family. So rejoice, thinking how wonderful it is, so many people do so many good things. especially all the different enlightened beings, spiritual masters, and practitioners, and rejoice. So all of this merit combined together, we dedicate primarily that all sentient beings are free from every form of suffering, especially free from hunger, thirst, loneliness, fear, oppression, and violence, and poverty, lack of education, and so forth, and sickness. May all sentient beings be free from sickness. And may all sentient beings have all the positive conditions they need to flourish, such as food, clothing, shelter, clean water, companionship, education, spiritual guidance, and friendship, clarity of mind, and have a kind heart, compassion. As well as wisdom. So then we can dedicate by reading some of these verses and trying to reflect on the meaning. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel, bodhicitta, that has not arisen, arise and grow. And may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Just as the great Manjushri and Samantabhadra too realize things as they are, I too dedicate all these merits in the best way, that I may follow their perfect example. I dedicate all these roots of virtue with the dedication praise is the best, by the victorious ones thus gone over 3 times, so I might perform good works. I will stop there. Okay, so thank you everyone for your participation, and I hope we meet again.